Hi, I'm Charles with AniCap. This is my recap for the anime Berserk of Gluttony. If you like my recaps, please consider subscribing. The story begins as a masked man fights several monsters. He demonstrates exceptional strength but is unsatisfied and wants more. We then watch as a man on a carriage is attacked by the same goblins and cries for help. Luckily for him, a couple of warriors arrive and the man is glad to be saved. The warriors easily defeat several of them, but there are hundreds more. This isn't a problem though, as they have more members in their group and proclaim that they will defeat all the monsters. Afterwards, we meet our protagonist named Fate, whose stomach growls from hunger. The band of warriors make their triumphant return and Fate hears them talking about their success. Fate states that he could never go goblin hunting like them since he is completely useless, and he has a stomach that never stops growling. Fate explains that he blames all his misfortune on his useless skill called gluttony. He reminds himself to be grateful though, as at least he has a job. Sometime later, everyone marvels as the Holy Knights make their way through the town. They are a trio of Valeric siblings. A man then fears for his life as he accidentally drops some food that touches one of them, and the one named Hato questions what the peasant is doing. The peasant begins to answer, but Hato becomes furious that the man is speaking to him. The peasant begins to apologize, but this makes them even more mad. They warn that anyone that insults the Holy Knights will have their heads cut off. They decide to leave but tell the man that he is lucky to still be alive. Everyone is upset to watch this happen, but no one is brave enough to do anything about it. At the castle, Fate is glad that the day is almost over and exclaims that it's almost time to go home. The knights make their way to the castle where they ask Fate if he thinks he has done a good job filling in for them. Fate thinks he has, so Raphael gives him his pay. As if throwing it on the ground wasn't bad enough, they make him pick it up in front of them too. Hato very clearly steps on Fate's hand on purpose, but mockingly apologizes as he states that Fate was so filthy that he didn't notice him. Fate's stomach begins to growl at the most awkward moment, and Raphael points out how disgusting Fate is. The knights are furious since the growling makes it seem like they don't pay him enough, and they beat him relentlessly. Fate thinks about how in this world, there are haves and there are have-nots. What separates them are the special powers bestowed by the gods, their skills. The knights keep treating him like a punching bag and explain that he owes his livelihood to them. Someone with a worthless skill like his is only earning money thanks to the grace of holy knights like them. They tell him that he should be grateful, and when he slacks off, it reflects poorly on them. They demand that he get on his feet, but only to knock him back down. They believe he needs to be taught a lesson and explain that defiant dogs need strict discipline. Just then, they are told to stop, since inflicting that kind of abuse on citizens they have sworn to protect is not an act of a holy knight. The girl talking is named Roxy, and she explains that watching the gate is an honorable duty for a holy knight. A duty that should be their responsibility. The knights consider it a difference of opinion, but decide that it's best to leave. Roxy helps the beaten down loser, but he notices Raphael giving him the dirtiest look. Roxy cleans him up and tells him that helping him is no problem since they are the same when it comes to watching gates. Furthermore, this is how a holy knight like herself should conduct themselves. She takes over guarding the gate and tells Fate to tell her if anything like this happens again. Instead of accepting the gesture like a normal person, Fate just tells her that he is used to it and leaves. Afterward, we see why he said that as he thinks about how Raphael is and there's no telling what he might do. It turns out that Fate isn't a complete loser as he is just trying to protect Roxy and doesn't want to risk getting her involved. The bartender explains to Fate that if he keeps letting the knights treat him that way, he's going to end up like the last guy. There's only one outcome for that, and it's a nasty one. On his way home, Fate curses how his stomach is still growling even though he just ate an entire meal. He condemns his gluttony skill and wishes he could have been born with something worthwhile. He is not asking to be a holy knight, and he would take being a warrior or even a merchant or a craftsman. However, there's no changing how things are. He states that when you have nothing, you're just trapped as a loser. Just then, Fate notices some thieves attacking someone, and the wimp's first thought is to get Roxy. He tells her what's going on, and she leaves the useless loser to take over her spot as a guard. He seems to just be okay with this and just stands by while he hears her beat up the thieves. Just then, one of the thieves begins to run towards Fate, and his cowardly instincts immediately tell him to run away. However, Fate stops himself and thinks about how Roxy trusted him with guarding the gate, and if he runs, it'll cause trouble for her. Fate then fights against every cowardly bone in his body to prepare to battle. He notices that the thief is already injured and only now becomes confident that he can stop him. Fate lets out a scream, giving his best impression of a brave warrior, and makes a hole right in the thief's chest. Just then, a voice states that his gluttony skill has been activated, and his stats will now increase. Fate can't understand what's happening, and the voice states that the skills identify and telepathy have been added. Fate has never been more confused in his life, just as Roxy returns from the fight. Of course, she is concerned for his life since he is so weak, but Fate notices something strange. He heard words coming from her, but her lips didn't move, and it was almost like he could hear her inner voice. He explains that he is okay, and it happens again. She states that she has to report everything, but Fate is shocked to see that he can't hear it anymore. He tells her that she can take credit for his kill, since he is sure it would cause problems for him if Raphael found out. Roxy wanted to give him credit, but as a show of gratitude, she settles on offering him a job working for her family. He initially tries to decline, but she doesn't listen, and asks him if he intends to serve the Valerics until it kills him. Fate begins to consider it and thinks about the two paths. On one side is a future where he is treated like trash all the time, and on the other side he can work for Roxy. Fate is concerned that if he leaves, then the person that replaces him will just get treated like trash instead. However, Roxy tells him to stop thinking so much and just ignore that very good point he made. Fate listens to her advice and agrees to work for her family. That night, Fate sits on his sorry excuse for a bed in his bedroom that looks like a prison and shockingly realizes that all his stats are now in the triple digits. His new skills are also a mystery, but he realizes that he must have been using telepathy. He has no clue what is happening to his body, but grows confident as he might now be able to beat monsters with his new stats. The next day, Fate searches for a sword, but the merchant is disappointed to see that he is poor. The merchant shoos him away as Fate thinks about how it's been 5 years since he came to the royal capital, and 2 silver coins are everything he has been able to save up by working. All hope isn't lost, however, as the merchant tells him that he can still afford the trash weapons he keeps in a barrel. The merchant turns his back, giving Fate the perfect opportunity to take whatever he wants, but Fate decides to just look in the barrel instead. While doing so, he uses his new Identify skill to read the stats of all the barrel weapons. They all have 0 for both durability and strength, but one sword captures his eye. It's filthy and has been treated like trash, so Fate can't help but notice how he has those qualities as well. Just then, Fate is shocked as he hears the words "Hey you" come from the sword. The sword, named Greed, states that it will make it worth his while and tells Fate to just hurry up and buy him. Greed knows about Fate's gluttony, and it says it's because they have a lot in common. Fate leaves his only 2 coins and happily takes his new talking sword. Elsewhere, the Valerics talk about how Roxy is apparently trying to hire Fate for the Hart household without even asking them. The girl named Memo wants to teach her what happens when someone defies the Valeric family, but Raphael points out that nobodies like Fate can easily be replaced. Besides that, the Harts and the Valerics are part of the 5 great families that support the kingdom, and there's no point in complicating that now. Raphael heads to the military district, prompting Memo to ask what he plans to study this time. He shocks her though, as he plans to study how to become immortal. Sometime later, Fate walks with his talking sword, and it warns him that something is approaching. A goblin appears from nowhere, but Fate is now able to destroy it. Doing so activates his gluttony skill again, and his stats are increased even more. This time, the skill's strength boost has been added. Greed then has a good laugh, as Fate is in great trouble when hundreds of goblins appear. However, Fate seems like a completely new person as he slices through several of the goblins. After every single elimination, his gluttony skill is activated, and he just keeps going. The words "gluttony skill activated" are repeated hundreds of times as Fate finishes off all the goblins, and he is shocked to see that his stats have increased to a crazy amount. Greed points out that Fate must be full now, and Fate notices that his stomach hasn't growled even once that day, which has never happened before. Fate is completely confused though, since he was under the impression that people were born with the only skills they would ever have. Greed points out that this is true, but Fate's gluttony skill makes him different. Normally, stats increase from battles, and based on one's experience, their level goes up. However, the gluttony skill steals stats and other skills, at the cost of not benefiting from experience. Fate begins to understand and realizes that that must be why he is still level 1. Greed then surprises Fate as he explains that he knows this because they are the same. Just then, they notice the band of warriors approaching, and Greed tells Fate that his gluttony skill isn't the kind of thing he wants other people finding out about. It's one of the skills that defy divine law. Fate determines that he must do his fighting alone, but Greed reminds him that he has him now, and Fate will never be alone again. Fate is glad that Greed has accepted him as his master, but Greed tells him to calm down with all the master talk. Just before they leave, Greed reminds him to take the goblin ears so Fate can get paid. Afterward, Fate collects his reward and thinks about all the food he wants to get, but Greed reminds him that his maintenance comes first. Greed wants to be treated like the gem he is, but Fate thinks he is seeing himself too highly. The sword explains though that they don't call him Greed for nothing. Just then they run into a man, and a little girl that's with him asks for help. Fate uses Identify to see this man's threat level in case he just wants to ignore the whole thing, but finds that he has a skill that allows him to hide his stats from the Identify skill. This means there's no telling what this guy is capable of. Greed wonders what he will do, and Fate shows that he is a completely different person now, as he states that they can't just ignore the girl's cry for help. They follow him, and the scummy guy tells the girl that she will serve as a slave to the Holy Knights. Greed points out that the guy is pretty tough and tells Fate that this is his last chance to turn back. As he prepares to fight, Fate thinks about how he finally has some power now, and if someone's suffering in front of him, he wants to help them with it. Thanks for watching part 1 of this recap. Make sure to subscribe for future parts.